Imagine living in the worst times in history, when hope seemed impossible. It may seem like today's days are already tough, but there were moments in history when simply being alive was worse than dying. Have you ever stopped to think about which periods those were? What situations turned life into endless, continuous suffering? In this video, we will reveal shocking historical facts, little-known curiosities, and mysteries that few dare to face. We'll talk about pandemics that wiped out millions, brutal genocides that destroyed entire communities, and cruel famines that left a trail of pain impossible to erase. These stories aren't just old chapters. They still echo in our society and make us question what humanity truly went through to survive. Get ready for a journey that will stir your emotions and expand your understanding of what it really means to live in history's darkest moments. Imagine waking up one day and finding out that half of your town has disappeared. No warning, no explanation, just silence, the smell of death, and empty streets. That's exactly what happened in Europe between 1347 and 1351, when the Black Death spread like wildfire. The disease arrived on ships, carried by rats and fleas, and within months, it turned into an unstoppable tragedy. In some cities, so many people died that there wasn't even time to bury them all. Entire families vanished in just a few days. One interesting fact is that many people believed it was a punishment from God because no one really understood what was happening. Churches filled with people begging for mercy, while the dead piled up in the streets. For a long time, it remained one of history's biggest mysteries. But the tragedy didn't stop with the bodies. The economy collapsed. No workers, no food, no trade. People started abandoning everything. Their jobs, their homes, even their own children. It sounds unbelievable, but there are reports of mothers leaving their babies behind to try to escape the plague. That's how desperate people were. And the most curious part, they started blaming innocent people. Jews were persecuted, accused of poisoning wells. Lepers were killed. It was a time of fear where anyone could be the next victim, not just of the disease but of violence too. One historical fact that stands out is that after this disaster, many people lost faith. Churches emptied out, priests ran away, and trust in authorities vanished for a long time. And even with all that suffering, the plague changed the course of history. It shook old systems and opened the door to new ideas and new ways of seeing the world. One interesting fact is that with fewer people, survivors became more valuable. New jobs appeared, wages rose, and society started to reshape itself. But the trauma, that stayed. The fear of sudden death, the distrust between neighbors, and the feeling that everything could fall apart at any moment. And if you think this was already too much, wait until you hear what happened in the 20th century, when the suffering didn't come from a disease, but from hunger created by leaders who turned into monsters. Imagine living in a country where you grow your own food, but you're not allowed to eat a single grain of it. Now picture soldiers knocking at your door, searching your home, and taking even the potatoes hidden under the floorboards. This isn't fiction. It's exactly what millions of Ukrainians faced between 1932 and 1933 during the Holodomor, a famine created by the Soviet government, led by Joseph Stalin, that stripped people of their right to survive. An interesting fact, the word Holodomor comes from two Ukrainian words, hunger and death. That says it all. Unlike droughts or natural disasters, this tragedy was man-made. Stalin set impossible grain quotas and, when people couldn't meet them, he took everything they had. Even the seeds for the next harvest were confiscated. And if anyone tried to hide food, they were arrested, tortured, or simply left to die. The images from that time are heartbreaking. Children with empty eyes, bodies lying in the streets, entire villages silent. It's curious and disturbing How humans can ignore so much suffering. In less than 2 years, between 3.5 and 7 million people died. And not just from hunger. There were reports of cannibalism, parents trading everything they owned for a piece of bread, mothers burying their children with their own hands. Farmers were treated like enemies of the state. And Soviet propaganda claimed it was all fake. One mystery that remains is how the world allowed this to happen without stepping in. The Soviet Union closed its borders, hid the truth, and silenced anyone who tried to speak out. Official newspapers showed a thriving Ukraine, while its people were dying by the millions. As cruel as this may sound, the Holodomor isn't just a distant memory. It's a powerful reminder of how badly power can be abused. This wasn't nature or fate. It was human choice, driven by politics and control. It stands as one of the most terrifying historical facts because no bombs were dropped. Just silence, censorship, and starvation. An entire people was crushed for the sake of an idea. It's curious to think that even today, hunger is still used as a weapon in some parts of the world. And if you think this was the worst people could do to each other, just wait until you hear what happened to the Armenian people not long after. Now imagine being at home with your family when soldiers suddenly knock on your door. They say it's just a temporary relocation, but in reality, they're taking you to die in the desert. This happened to over 1.5 million Armenians during the Ottoman Empire between 1915 and 1917. It was a cruel, systematic, and silent plan to erase an entire people. The curious thing is that, despite countless records, photos, and testimonies, there are still those who deny this genocide happened. Women were separated from their husbands, many raped or sold as slaves. Children were torn from their parents' arms and taken to camps where they were forced to convert religions. An interesting fact is that everything was done in an organized way. The extermination wasn't a sudden outburst of violence, but a cold plan orchestrated by the Ottoman government. And the worst part, it happened quietly, while the world was distracted by World War I. These people didn't just die physically. Their stories, cultures, and ancient traditions were taken away along with them. Many Armenians were forced to walk hundreds of kilometers without food or water, under the scorching sun, until they collapsed and never got up again. Those who resisted were executed. A cruel mystery is that many of these crimes were committed by neighbors, acquaintances, or even former friends, manipulated by ethnic hate propaganda. And even with all this horror, few countries officially recognize this genocide to this day, mainly due to political pressure. It's curious how economic interests and strategic alliances manage to silence such glaring truths. The pain of the survivors crossed generations. Families who managed to escape spread across the world, trying to rebuild their lives from scratch, carrying on their backs a story few wanted to hear. What's even more terrifying is to realize that this was only the first genocide of the 20th century, a kind of rehearsal for other tragedies that would come later. In fact, one of the most impactful historical facts is that Adolf Hitler later used the global silence about the Armenian genocide as justification for his own crimes, saying, "Who still talks about the Armenians today?" That says a lot about what silence allows. That's why remembering these stories is so important. Because when the world pretends it didn't see, evil repeats itself. And if you think this level of destruction is limited to war and ethnic hatred, get ready to see what happened when entire continents were conquered, exploited, and destroyed in the name of progress. If you had lived in the Americas during the 16th and 17th centuries, you would probably have seen your village invaded, your family torn apart, and your culture attacked by forces that seemed unstoppable. The Europeans didn't arrive as curious visitors. They came with weapons, diseases, and a brutal will to dominate. An interesting historical fact is that within just 150 years after this encounter, between 50 and 90 million indigenous people died. Many victims of wars, slavery, and especially diseases like smallpox, which were new to these peoples. For those who lived through it, it wasn't a simple arrival, but a violent shock that erased stories, languages, and entire lives. In addition, African slavery was intensified to support the new colonial system. Millions of people were ripped from their lands, transported in inhumane conditions across the Atlantic, and forced to work as slaves. It's a sad and curious fact that the quest for wealth and power turned humanity into merchandise. Indigenous and African peoples had their identities denied, their histories erased or distorted, and their suffering often forgotten. Even today, the echoes of that violence shape the world we live in, showing that the consequences of that brutal past have not yet been fully overcome. This destruction was not only physical but cultural and spiritual. Entire languages disappeared, beliefs were banned, and ways of life destroyed. Peoples were forced to live on reservations while their lands were taken. All this happened in the name of progress and civilization, ideals that now seem absurd but at the time justified enormous violence. The mystery, and the warning, lies in how such a cruel justification gained strength and left deep scars. Reflecting on this helps us better understand how recent genocides like those in Rwanda and Bosnia also arose from intolerance and manipulation, a cycle we still haven't managed to break. What makes people turn into mortal enemies with their own neighbors? In Rwanda, this question found a terrible answer. In just 100 days, hundreds of thousands of people were killed by those who lived side by side. The brutality of this genocide reveals a disturbing fact. Hatred can grow so strong that it destroys entire communities, and worse, the world can turn a blind eye to it. About 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus were murdered by neighbors armed with machetes, clubs, and improvised weapons, in an explosion of violence that seemed impossible to control. Rwanda's tragedy also exposes a painful mystery. How did the international community, with all its resources and warnings, fail to act in time to prevent the massacre? Meanwhile, the war in the former Yugoslavia between 1992 and 1995 brought another dark chapter to recent human history: the genocide in Bosnia. In Srebrenica, thousands of Bosnian men and boys were killed in a systematic ethnic cleansing campaign. But the violence did not stop there. Rape camps were used to destroy entire families, especially Bosnian women who suffered silent brutality for years. The interesting and disturbing fact is that, even with the international media closely following the conflict, these atrocities continued without the quick and decisive response the world expected. This shows that despite all the progress in diplomacy and communication, genocides are still possible, and silence can be complicit. These recent genocides serve as a harsh reminder that humanity's violent past is not as distant as it seems. They show that fear, hatred, and intolerance remain powerful forces capable of turning neighbors into mortal enemies within months. What makes these historical facts so unsettling is that even with all technological and diplomatic advances, the world has yet to learn how to prevent tragedies like these. And if you think these stories are closed chapters, it's important to reflect on how they echo in many current and future conflicts, because the shadow of hatred is always ready to rise again, if we aren't vigilant and don't learn from the mysteries of the past. Now that you've learned about these times when living was worse than dying, here's a question to reflect on. How did we let so much pain and destruction happen? Have we truly learned from these historical facts? Or are we doomed to repeat the same mistakes? What mysteries and lessons are still out there, waiting to be uncovered? If these topics sparked your curiosity, why not continue this journey with us? Leave a comment telling us which era shocked you the most or which mystery you'd like us to explore further. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss the upcoming videos, where we'll uncover even more curiosities, interesting facts, and mysteries from our history. Stay tuned because the past has a lot to teach us, if we're willing to pay attention and learn.